Good afternoon. Thank you for attending today's webinar about organizational change management in higher education. Your guide this afternoon is Dr. Shannon Sims, Vice President of our advisory business, heading up our organizational change management practice, or as we like to say, OCM. OCM services is a substantial part of our advisory business, making up over 25% of our advisory work. We're committed to helping our clients sustain success through OCM with more than 80% of our advisory consultants certified in ProSci, including our business analysts, project managers, business intelligence experts, and functional and solution experts. Dr. Sims has over 20 years consulting experience as an organizational psychologist focused on behavior change, from simple process improvement to complex, high-profile transformations. She has a lot of war stories from almost all industries, including federal and state government, nonprofit, commercial sectors, and of course, higher education. So her advice and recommendations are rooted in a lot of practical experience. Shannon jokes that the majority of her career has been hazmat, where she has been asked to do a cleanup when clients realized they had forgotten there were people on the other side of the change who needed to do work differently. In addition to her PhD, Shannon has a PMP and ProSci Advanced Instructor certification, so her perspective is well-rounded. Our webinar today is interactive. Poll questions will pop up on your screen throughout the session. Shannon will be tailoring her presentation based on the group's responses, so we ask that you please participate. If you have a question, feel free to submit at any time during the webinar, and we'll be sure to answer them at the end. You can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical difficulty, you can click on the Help menu at the top of your screen. And lastly, an on-demand version of today's webinar will be available on our website in approximately 2 business days. Everyone who registered for this webinar will receive an email with a link to view the webcast on demand. All right, let's get started. I'm going to hand it over to Shannon for today's session.
Vanessa, thank you so much for that introduction. And I just wanted to welcome everyone for joining us here this afternoon on a Tuesday afternoon. And if you're in the Northeast, it's a little rainy here in the area. I've been calling it fake spring. Vanessa already shared with you a bit of my background, a bit of kind of spotlight of my background. What she didn't say is that I'm kind of a research geek, and I love the data. I think data helps us to make better decisions. It helps us figure out where should we put our limited resources, and it helps us to walk back from maybe strong emotions or opinions so that we can actually see a bigger picture. And I think that this is why this presentation really about using the right data to kind of put a line in the sand on your budget and your staffing for change management efforts for your projects, really thinking about how do we use data to quantify how much change management we're going to need. I think that's why it's so important, especially so much change going on just across industries. Vanessa mentioned a couple things about our practice. I'm not going to drain this, but I just really wanted to give you just a quick word that as a firm, we've really partnered with organizations for almost 20 years to help drive transformation. And a big part of that is making sure that we're integrating the people side of change, being structured and deliberate about that as we are helping to design, develop, and deliver the solution. And we really do practice what we preach. We recognize that not everybody is going to be a change management practitioner, but the more that our frontline functional leaders understand the importance of people, the better equipped they are to really help drive solutions that are going to be sustainable for the long run. So the insights I shared today, they're really built on practical experience. They're built on practical research, and they're built kind of from across industry. So I really just want to talk just for a quick second around what we're going to accomplish today. My goal is that by the end of this, if we were just out and about and asked you, what'd you learn? I want you to be able to define the importance of organizational change management, or as Vanessa mentioned, OCM is how we kind of refer to it. So we want to focus on that. We want you to be able to describe and quantify some of those key factors that you need to scope your change management effort. And really at the end of it, I want you to walk away with a practical summary level assessment of the scope and your staffing needs for your project. I think higher ed's really experiencing some historic rates of transformation. I think they're brought in part by just the fact that we have rapidly changing technology. There's also a significant focus on student retention, just kind of across the board in both nonprofit and public and for-profit. And many organizations, many institutions are looking at how do we streamline back office operations. So we have changing systems and changing data processes and changing people. I think it creates challenges for many organizations, but there are some nuances, I think, in higher ed. Higher ed that is rooted often in really established tradition, that we have to think about some of those unique aspects from a higher ed perspective. I think that change can be a little harder. We also know that budgets are tight and there's a lot of scrutiny on the projects, and so it can feel maybe like it's a little bigger. So my goal is really to give you a practical tool at the end that you would be able to walk away and kind of do a gut check on any project that you're embarking on before you have to put your budgets, your budget in place to think about how much are we really going to need. So let's get started. I think change management means different things to different people. From our perspective, it's really around the organizations. It's around the people. It's not around the change control process on how, if we integrate new functionality into our technology, how do we manage that process? This is really around the people side of things. And I think it's important to just level set that organizations don't actually change. They change one person at a time. The people in the organization changes. And there's a couple things we need to think about when we think about these changes. That there is always going to be a dip in performance when we make a shift from the current state to the future state. There's always a period of disruption. We envision, right? We start a new project because we're envisioning that there are going to be great benefits that we're going to achieve at the end of it. We don't change just because we have extra money lying around. We change because we want to achieve some type of result on the other end. Often our primary stakeholders, or maybe our executive sponsors, that once they've made the decision that this is the way forward, their expectation, if you look at that top line, their expectation is that we're going to realize our desired state like almost immediately. What usually happens is that orange line on the bottom, we often see this dip deep down into resistance and doubt before we start to move back up the other side into realizing the tangible benefits. This dip often happens for three different reasons, maybe at three different times. The first is as people are starting to become aware of the change and they start to question, do we even need this change, right? I probably have heard people say, hey, if it's not broke, why should we fix it? And so one of the first things we know is that we just need helping people understand the business rationale and why we're making the change is really important. The second point where the dip happens as people start to say, okay, you know what, I can see that there's value in this change. They may not necessarily trust the solution because you didn't ask for my input and on how this works, right? You didn't ask for my input, and we're so unique that the solution can't possibly work for us. So I may not trust the individuals who have been part of the design team. I may not trust that the solution they're designing is actually going to work for me as a person or maybe for my business unit. The third piece, the third point where we see dip is it's really around the habits. And we have to unlearn old habits in order to learn new habits. There's some really great research, see, back to I'm a data geek, but there's some great research from Duke University that has found that about 40 to 50% of what we do every single day is a habit. It's something that's processed in a part of our brain where it is so routine and so rote that we really don't even have to think about the steps. If you've ever been driving somewhere and you realize it's almost like you kind of wake up for a minute and you're driving the vehicle and you've been on autopilot. We're processing that route that we've taken in the vehicle in a different part of our brain. as soon as we change the button from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, we are slowing people down. They have to think about something that used to be a habit. Now they have to think about it, and they're using kind of the prefrontal cortex. They're using the part of their brain that we use for problem solving and the big hairy problems, the things where we're doing the analysis, right? So now I'm processing something as simple as where's the form again, or what's the process, and do I click here, do I click there? Something that yesterday I could do without thinking about, now I have to use all my valuable brain to do something that yesterday was simple, right? So it causes frustration, it can cause angst, it can cause things just to be a little slower. So organizational change management, it can't eliminate that dip. There's just so much of that is just inherent in who we are as people, but it can minimize. So if we are deliberate and structured about our approach to change management, we can minimize that dip and that, shorten that the timeline and minimize the dip and the disruption. So I want you to think about the return on the investment as you're starting down this path of a project. I want you to kind of just take a minute and pull a project into your head. And as we're going through some of these polls, you're going to see this thing up in the right corner that says do this. Just pull out a piece of paper and pull out a pen, make some notes for yourself. Okay, because we're going to use this information toward the latter part of this deck to really just kind of do some scoping. So the first question you really have to think about is how much of my project benefits is dependent on people doing something different. And the old way of thinking, or the common way of thinking, is that if I am perfect in employing my strategy, if I'm perfect and my processes are just brilliant and perfect and absolute, and our technology is spot on, but we forgot about the people, that we're still going to realize about 80 to 90% of the results that we anticipated. In actuality, human performance is a force multiplier. So if we're 100% at strategy and process and technology, and maybe we're only maybe we're 0%, we forgot about the people completely, or maybe I'm going to give us the benefit of the doubt, maybe we're at 10%, we're going to see 0 to minimal results. Because the technology, even if it's perfect, somebody has to use it. The process may be perfectly designed, but somebody has to actually follow the steps and do something different in order for us to achieve the results. So what I want you guys to do, we're going to open up a quick poll. And I want you to think about the project that, maybe you're working on a project right now, or you're getting ready to embark on a project. And I'm just going to ask you to answer the question, how much of your project success is based on people doing something different in their job? So just take a second. Is it 0 to 25%, 26 to 50, 51 to 75%, 76 to 100? We'll just give you a second to kind of answer this, and then we will share the results of your poll. It's just a gut check. When you think about it, if you're just laying fiber optic cables, it may be 0%. If you're deploying a new software as a software as a service, cloud-based ERP system, it may be more, between 60 to 100%. Okay, Vanessa? All right, so for the folks that are on the call with us today, vast majority of you are in the 76 to 100%, right? There's a significant impact, or our results and our ROI is significantly impacted by the people. All right, Vanessa, thank you so much. So let's just kind of hold that in the back of our mind. What I want you to think about, right, is being deliberate about approaching the people side of change. There's a direct correlation with us achieving our project results. ProSci, who is a world leader, a global leader in change management best practice, they have the longest longitudinal study that's been going on for the last 20 plus years. They have consistently found that there's a direct correlation between being deliberate, kind of deploying an excellent change management approach, and achieving project results. You're 6 times more likely to achieve your project, to meet or exceed your project objectives if you are deliberate about your change management approach. What I want to draw your attention to, because none of us are going to do this textbook perfect, right? But even if you look at, I think of POUR as we were ad hoc, or maybe we released a couple emails, or we, at least let people know about training before we actually needed them to be there, right? That's kind of on the POUR end. But even if you look at the fair or the good, right? Like we're being a little bit more deliberate. The jump between poor and fair and the jump between poor and good is so substantial that even just with a little bit more focus on our change management approach, we can achieve significant results. And I think that is an important takeaway for us as we're thinking about how do you scope it, how do you set a budget for it. When we're thinking about our solution, we're thinking about where we are today and where we want to be in the future. We're designing, we're developing, we're delivering that solution. We also need to be thinking in tandem about the people. How do we help them to be ready, willing, and able? Where we are today is very powerful. Where we're going to go in the future, it's scary. And everything in the middle is just kind of messy. But we need both of those working together, those work streams working together in order for us to achieve our project results. I think of this very practically as getting your project manager and somebody who is responsible and accountable for organizational change management, working in tandem to make sure that the project plan is taking into account everything you need to do to design, develop, and deliver that solution, and how you're going to help the impacted groups to be ready, willing, and able to work the new way of working. So how do we go about doing that, right? How do we think about putting aside the right amount of budget and the right amount of staffing to help us to do that? There are a couple key factors that will allow you to do kind of a rapid assessment to put that line in the sand before your project even gets started. The first is thinking about our stakeholders. The second is change complexity. And the third is organizational readiness. When we think about our stakeholder impact, we're thinking in terms of how many stakeholders are there and how does that impact the different stakeholder groups? Is it the same? Are all stakeholder groups impacted exactly the same? Or is there significant variance? I'm working with a higher education institution right now, roll out a financial ERP system. And as we started thinking through the different groups across the university, it is not clear who fills different roles. It's not based on title. And so it's going to be we're going to have a lot of stakeholder groups, and some of those stakeholder groups, somebody may fit in many different buckets. Additionally, some stakeholder groups may only have one new process they need to learn. Other stakeholder groups, they may have 100 new processes to learn, or we're going to be rolling out a new workflow or a new approval process or a new budgeting process. All those things introduce variance into how the stakeholders, and it just increases our complexity. The second to think about is the actual change complexity. How big and how disruptive is this change for your institution specifically? Is this a straightforward process change that is 9 steps and everybody's doing it exactly the same way? Or is it a radical multi-year transformation where we are changing everything from recruiting new students to retaining new students to how we're interacting with new students? Two completely different kind of scopes on how complex the projects may be. That has an impact on how you scope your budget. The third area is really around organizational readiness. Is your organization actually ready to make this transition from how we're doing things today to how we're going to do things in the future? Is the organization ready, or is the organization resistant? Is the organization super comfortable with how we do things today, and they're going to kind of put on the brakes a little bit because if it's not broke, why fix it? Or I like the status quo. Or if nobody knows what I'm doing, then I have job security. Things that I've heard in organizations that are more change resistant. Or are they like, yes, bring it on. I am ready. There are ways that we can do this better. I could use more time in my day to do some of the things I never get to. Okay. So let's talk about the stakeholder impact first. So as you think about your project, and remember just to jot this down on a piece of paper, and then Vanessa's going to launch a poll for us here in a second. So if you think about your project, how much of your workforce is actually impacted? So Vanessa, if you could launch our poll for us. What we're going to offer to you, and again, this is just kind of a gut check, right? This is not going to be absolute, but is it 0 to 10%? Or is it, if you think about the project's going to impact like a project team, a very defined project team, 11 to 25%, or maybe that's like a group or a department. 26 to 50, maybe it's multiple departments or a really large business unit comprised of, a couple hundred people or 1,000 people. 51 to 75%, it's like most departments, or they're going to be multiple departments, and we have external, right? Anytime I think about us reaching out externally, it starts to get into a bigger impact if our customer base or our student base is impacted. 76 to 100 is it's enterprise-wide, everybody is impacted. So take a second, just rate your poll for us. Vanessa, can you share with us the results? So for our group today, the vast majority of folks are saying that this is kind of an enterprise-wide project. We have a lot of stakeholder groups that are being impacted. All right. So the next poll that I want you to think about is if you have 50 or 60 or 70% of your workforce that is being impacted, think about delineating those stakeholder groups and how big of a difference of an impact is there. Is it high variation or is there no variation? So Vanessa, if you could launch our poll, please. And just take a second. Are all stakeholder groups being impacted 100% the same way? Then there's no variation. If we think, yeah, there are going to be some slight nuances, but pretty much it's going to be the same. Moderate, yeah, we've got some groups that are going to be impacted more significantly than others, or high variation. We have such significant differences across the enterprise. We're going to have to really be nuanced in how we're engaging the different groups. So take a second, just respond to the variance, how big the variance is. And so Vanessa, if you could show us what our results are. All right, so we have somewhere between a high to moderate to high variance in a stakeholder impact. All right, thank you so much. So we've talked about stakeholders, we've talked about the variance. What I want us to think about here is change complexity. And the complexity is really thinking in terms of, how big of a deal is this for our organization, and how many moving parts are we really going to have to think about? Is this large? Is it disruptive? What's unique about this project over other projects? Is it, are there a lot of departments impacted? Is our timeline super aggressive, or is our timeline, exceptionally long, or do we feel like the timeline is adequate? And so for this exercise, what I want you to do, I'm going to kind of read through these 6 questions, and I want you just to jot down your response. We're just using a 5-point scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree. Write down your score, kind of thinking gut check on this project, and then we're going to tally those scores up at the end. So the first question is, there are a large number of locations, actually physically different locations, that are going to be impacted by this change. If you agree, right, give yourself a 5 if you strongly agree, give yourself a 1 if you strongly disagree. Like if it's all co-located in one building, it is one location, give yourself a 1, strongly disagree. There will be a significant amount of change to current processes as a result of this project. If you give yourself a 5 if you strongly agree, give yourself a 1 if you strongly disagree. If you're not sure, you can always default to the middle, kind of around a 3. There's going to be new technology as a result of this project. So different than processes, new technology. 5 if you strongly agree, 1 if you strongly disagree. As you think about the people and the work that they do, the level of change impact to employees' current job roles as a result of this project is going to be high. For example, you're rolling out new technology across multiple departments, and your goal is that you want to stand up a shared service, an HR shared service. So people's job roles are going to be significantly impacted. Give yourself a 5 if you strongly agree, a 1 if you strongly disagree. There will be a large amount of disruption to staff levels or restructuring with people aligning to new managers. If you're going to reorg, if your project is a reorganization and people are going to have new bosses that they report to who are going to do their performance assessments, right? That's a significant impact. So give yourself a 5 if you strongly agree. Give yourself a 1 if you strongly disagree. And then the time frame to implement the change is either super aggressive or it's really long. And the reason long is important is as we introduce longer changes, the organization can start to experience change fatigue. And that can have negative impact, and we have to plan for it appropriately. So if you feel like your time frame is adequate, give yourself a 1. If you feel like you've got super aggressive or really long time frames, give yourself a 5. So what I want you to do, this may be the hardest part of our conversation, is just take a second and tally up your scores on your paper. Look at the key at the bottom, and I'm going to ask Vanessa to launch our poll. And I just want you to indicate, was your change complexity score, was it between 6 to 13, kind of indicating that maybe this is a small or an incremental change? Is your score between 14 to 22, which is more a moderate to kind of a significant change for the organization? Or is your score between 23 to 30, which indicates that maybe we have a large or more disruptive in change in front of us? The project's going to be large or it's going to be disruptive. So just take a second, give us your score. And Vanessa, if you could share with us what the results are. So we're kind of right here between a moderate to a large disruptive. So about 57% indicated this is large disruptive, about 43% who polled it's more in the moderate range. All right, thank you so much, Vanessa. The last factor that we're going to score and the last poll that we're going to do is really around organizational readiness. When I think about organizational readiness, it's really thinking about what is unique about your culture, what's unique about how you get work done, how people deal with change in your organization. Are your stakeholders asking for this type of change, or are they already telling you, please don't change this? Worked with a transportation organization, and they were moving from a 40-year-old green screen DOS system to a new cloud-based system, walking around on the tablet. And they had individuals who'd worked there for 40 years. And they said, please don't change this on us while, we're 6 months from retirement. So a lot of stakeholders were very comfortable with the status quo. You have to think about how have past changes been managed. What's the history? Organizations have long memories. So how have past changes been managed, and what kind of memory are we going to have to work through when it comes to how this change is going to be managed? Are decisions centralized or are they decentralized? Working with another organization that they have it's more a federated model. I think more like an insurance agency where other organizations are incorporated and they have this dotted line back to the headquarters, right? Much more of a decentralized, many more masters and decision makers and people who have to approve different projects. And how much other change is going on in your organization? Is this part of a bigger transformation? Did you just get new leadership? Are we changing everything to just roll out a new strategic plan, right? We have to think about how much other change is going on in the organization that's really pulling people's attention, and it's going to pull their attention away from our project specifically. So we're going to just talk through these questions. So again, 6 questions, rated on a scale of 1 to 5, total score of 30. The first question is, employees are not satisfied with the current state and they believe a change is needed. If you strongly agree with this question or this statement, give yourself a 5. If people are super comfortable with the status quo, give yourself a 1. Employees believe that past organizational changes have been executed really well. Give yourself a 5 if you strongly agree. Give yourself a 1 if you strongly disagree. There are no other changes going on within the organization that impact this group. If that's true and your project and your change is the only change on the block, give yourself a 5. If there's a lot of other stuff going on and this is just one of 20 different projects, give yourself a 1. Project sponsors, the executives or the senior leaders who are accountable for the results of this project? Are they supportive of this change? Some organizations, project sponsors, inherit projects, and they may not be 100% supportive. If the project sponsors are supportive, give yourself a 5. If they're not, if you strongly disagree, give yourself a 1. Now think about the next tier below those executives. The business leaders. Are the business leaders supportive of this change? Give yourself a 5 if you strongly disagree. Give yourself a 1 if you strongly disagree. If you're not sure, or you think they might be on the fence, give yourself a 3. And then the last group to think about are your frontline managers and supervisors. Are they supportive of this change? Give yourself a 5 if you strongly agree. Give yourself a 1 if you strongly disagree, if you already know that they're going to be resistant. If you don't know, that's entirely possible, just give yourself a 3. So take a second, tally up your score. You're going to get a score between 6 and 30. And then we're going to have you just rank your score in our poll. So Vanessa, if you could launch the poll. So if your score was between 6 to 13, then your organization is not ready for the change that's in front of you. If your score was between 14 and 22, then your organization is kind of ready. Your organization is moderately ready to make this change that's going to result because of your project. If your score is between 23 to 30, then your organization is ready for the change. So we'll give you a second to finish logging your responses. Vanessa, if you could share with us what our collective response is. Overwhelmingly, we feel that our organizations are moderately ready to change at 86% of our respondents in the moderately ready to change. All right, outstanding. Thank you, Vanessa. Perfect. So the gist, before I kind of get to our formula, the gist is the more stakeholder groups and the higher variance or the bigger difference in change impact on the groups, plus the higher your score for change complexity and the lower your score for organizational readiness, means we're going to need to be more deliberate and structured in how we approach the people side of our change in order to realize kind of the people-related ROI of our project. So as we think about planning, our budget, I want to share with you guys just a couple charts from ProSci's global research, just to really help you to kind of see how your peers in the industry are thinking about what they're doing. When ProSci went out and asked participants of their study, how much are you spending on organizational change management? What's the average change management budget versus kind of the total project investment? You can kind of see that really the key is even a $100,000 project had investment from a change management perspective. When I did the calculation for this, it averages between 10 to 20% of the total budget should be kind of focused on change management or activities specific to helping the people to be ready, willing, and able to make that transition. And there are a lot of things that people spend that money on. When ProSci asks, what did you spend it on, right? I think there are some hidden costs that kind of pop out. They're spending it on change management resources, whether that's going external to bring on external expertise that they're only going to need for the project, or they're investing in people within the organization to really do this, or they're working with an organization right now that is looking to hire internally, or they're deploying folks from a change management office to come support this project. They're looking at change management resources. They're also looking at training. That could be the design, the development, the delivery, the materials. They're looking at communications, which is all around the planning and the people's time, and can also be the, if we have to print, or if we're going off and we're having swag produced, right? I thought this was interesting that there is a separate bucket for external consultants. I think in future research ProSci is going to be clarifying. When we talk about change management resource costs, are we talking internal or are we talking external as well? So they want to get greater clarity in that area. They're just general expenses. Every time you host an event, maybe you have to rent a room, maybe you are hosting a kickoff, or maybe you're hosting a luncheon, maybe you're doing rewards and recognition, and you want to do something nice for the participants in your project team. Maybe there's travel. If you have a lot of different locations, there can be travel associated. Worked with an institution that had an international presence. It was more cost effective to send one of our people over overseas than it was to fly their people over here to complete the training. Translation costs. This is one that has come up more often in some of the higher ed, is that we have bilingual employee base, and English, your training may not be effectively delivered if it's in English and we need to be translating to individuals' native language. I've also seen costs around mobile devices or kiosks, or making sure that hourly employees have access to devices if we want them to kind of do self-service on technology. So there's all kinds of things that the money could kind of go toward. And it's way more than email and job aids. So as we think about how do you then scope your specific project, and I'm just going to use I'm going to use what you guys shared with me around kind of our project collectively, right? So as a whole, we said that please disregard my inability to kind of annotate the slide here, but we said that our ROI was kind of in the high area. We said that our change variance was kind of in this moderate, right? In this moderate to significant change variance. We said that our change complexity was really in this moderate to large disruptive changes. And as a whole, we said that our organization really was kind of moderately ready to change. And so what this model just helps us to do is, as we're thinking about how do we start thinking about how much budget we should be allocating or asking for, how many people are we going to need, not people, full-time equivalent, because these could be percentages of different individuals with different skill sets, right? Maybe we need 10% of a graphic designer and we need 50% of somebody who's going to write all of our communications. So as I look at this, if I were doing a gut check for my project, I really would start looking in kind of this area, and I might actually even split the difference. And then I may pad it a little bit just to make sure that you've got a little cushion in case you have things like, hey, we've got to go print a bunch of stuff, or for all the incidentals that maybe we didn't think about. So as you're thinking about your specific project, and I think Vanessa shared that we will be sharing this recording out, so you'll have access to this chart that you can use kind of as you're thinking about future projects. But it really just helps you to start to think about, how much should I be thinking of? How much money should I be putting aside? How many people, how many FTEs am I really going to need to be leveraging for my project? The question I get a lot is, well, Shannon, that's kind of a lot. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of thousands of dollars to have some people send out emails before a go live and to create some job aid for technical implementation. And it really is far more than just emails and job aids. When we're thinking about a project plan, when we think about being as structured and as deliberate about the people side of change as we are about the design of the solution, we have to think about all of those things that are going to help us to really move the needle. We have to think about assessing the change impacts and understanding our readiness. We need to develop a strategy and then be monitoring that throughout. We need to think about how we help our leaders to be ready. And the leaders aren't just the sponsors. They are our managers. They're our business leaders. They're the peer influencers that really have people's ears within the departments. We have to think about our communications, right? Lots of different communications. Research says 5 to 7 times before somebody starts to actually listen. Microsoft says it's anywhere from 6 to 20. So it kind of depends. Bottom line, it's a lot. Over and over, and then training and knowledge transfer. And especially if you're rolling out technology training, being able to provide the business context and to be able to provide the process context, help people understand what is and is not changing, what can and cannot be done in the system, and what needs to be done outside of the system. We also need to think about role, right? Kind of that organizational alignment up at the top. Are roles changing? Do we need to be doing job mapping? Are there going to be significant shifts in people's reporting relationships? So there's a lot more going on with your budget than just emails and job aids. And there's a lot of people that's doing the work as well. When I think about my responsibility as a change management expert, I'm really this baby little gear over on the left side that's working with leadership, and it's working with experts in communication and engagement and maybe graphic design and video, folks who are just really skilled at that. It is not necessarily my strength. I'm working with people who are very skilled at events and learning and thinking about sustainment and reinforcement. And that's the engine that's kind of going on behind the scenes to really help the frontline leaders to drive the change. There's a difference between change management and change leadership. The change management helps to equip your frontline leaders to really drive the change, from your executive sponsors, that leader coalition I just kind of talked through, to our SMEs, our subject matter experts, and our project team members. They are all on the front line as that key champion of this change, and we want to equip them to really make a significant impact. So before I open up for questions, just a quick summary. Key takeaways for you is that, just remember that when we start talking about organizational change, our organizations don't change. The people within the organizations change, and they change one person at a time. If we are deliberate in our approach to manage the people side of change, we're going to be 6 times more likely to achieve project success. You can do a rapid assessment ahead of time to determine the initial level of effort that you're going to need for your project budget. You don't have to wait until you've brought everybody together for a project kickoff. You can do that rapid assessment up front just to kind of put the line in the sand on what you think you're going to need. Change management, being deliberate, is more than emails and job aids, and that our experts, the folks who are doing the work of the work, they're often behind the scenes to support those forward-facing champions to really lead your project and lead your change effort. So that, my friends, is a down and dirty, how do I figure out how much change management is enough? And we have some time for additional questions. I do want to say that if you have a specific project that you just want to talk through, maybe you've embarked on something or you just need to talk through something specific, by all means, please take my contact information. Give me a shout. We'll get some time on the calendar and we can talk about your unique needs. So Vanessa, I'm going to turn it over to you and see, do we have any questions that have come in either through the Q&A or through the chat?
Thanks, Shannon. That was a great session. Yes, we have a few questions that have come in, but of course, please feel free to continue to send your questions in as we answer these first few. Okay, so the first one, our university has been historically slow to embrace change. Can you share a tip or two for getting the team on board?
Oh, great question. Yeah, I think that is probably pretty common in most higher education institutions. And I do think that it's super rooted in tradition. I think it's, even when I think about the grants process and I think about academic research and just kind of from start to finish, how many steps kind of are included there in order to make sure that it is, sound science. It's not surprising that higher ed institutions have a harder time, I think, with change. I think one of the key things is really thinking in terms of engaging individuals in the process. As you think across the institution and the folks that are going to be impacted, are there opinion leaders? Can you work with the department heads to figure out who the local opinion leaders are, and to help them kind of bring them into the fold, and to help them to become change champions? There's some really interesting research specifically in the technology adoption area. And my kind of faith in science, my hypothesis is it applies to most changes, because we're kind of a Yelp nation now, that peer opinion is actually the biggest lever that to help mitigate resistance to technology changes. So I would assume peer opinion is the biggest lever to mitigate just resistance to change as a whole. And so I think if you can focus on, it's not your change management experts that are communicating, but getting the leaders and equipping your managers. But if you can stand up some type of change champion network to equip them to really go back and talk about the project in a positive light back within their departments and divisions, you'll get a bigger lift. You'll get a bigger lift probably more quickly.
Thank you. All right, next question. Do you have rules of thumb for best modes of communication of change? In person, email, web, all of the above?
Oh yeah. My rule of thumb is, when I'm coming into a new client environment, is to really think about what's already been effective and to leverage those, and then to introduce something new and novel that's going to get somebody's attention. For instance, if you already have bulletin boards, that is something that people are just familiar with. Well, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's leverage what works for your organization. But then let's introduce something novel. Maybe it's just the color scheme. Maybe it's something like a desk drop, where you're actually putting something on their desk. It's just something enough to get their attention. One of my favorite things to do is lunch fairs, or on go live day, standing maybe at the entrances to the different buildings, and you give something out to people, and you give them the URL, right? Like a business card. I worked on a project once where we just gave people smiley face stress balls and a business card just with the URL to a CBT training. And what we found is every time we did that, we had like 710% spike in completions. And it was a very dry workplace violence prevention program training. But because that interaction of just, I gave you something and then I asked you to do something, we have this internal, okay, I'll go do it. And once they got into it, they completed it. I think if you have something really important to convey, if it's super high impact, like I'm changing somebody's salary, we're changing who their boss is, we're changing the performance assessment process, I'm moving your office, things that could really have an impact on safety or security, those things should be done one-on-one. They should be delivered by the manager or the senior leader. They shouldn't come via email. They're very personal. They can have very emotional reactions. So that's important. I also think if you can host face-to-face or offer a webinar capability, there's something about, if a senior leader gives time to an event, it kind of conveys the importance, and it gives a cue to participants that this is something I should pay attention to. And so that's something that you may want to consider, is how do you best leverage your executive sponsor into your communication efforts.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have one more question. This person would like to know, what is the most important thing we can do to drive successful change in higher education?
Okay. The most important thing that we can do to drive successful change in higher education. I would say just the simple fact of being more deliberate in how you approach your change management is going to give you a big lift. I'd also offer that you have to combine that with thinking about change leadership. Too often I see in most organizations, and I counsel my clients and my higher ed clients not to put the onus on the change management team if people don't embrace or adopt the future way of working. We can only do so much. People don't want to hear from the change management team. We're there to help equip the frontline leaders. And so you need that structured approach, but you've got to engage your executives and your managers and those peer change champions to really be that forward-facing those change leaders. A lot of organizations forget about the middle managers and complain that there's a communication gap between our executives. The executives share stuff, and then the information never kind of makes it down to the front line. Our middle managers are at the bottom of the fun curve. They've got a lot of pressures being pushed down by their senior leaders, a lot of demands from their teams, and they're the ones who all the changes kind of get filtered through. And so if we could focus on equipping them to better prepare themselves and to lead through change, I think we could get lift.
Thank you, Shannon. All right, if anyone has any more questions, looks like one just came in. What are good metrics that you have used in the past to measure to see if change management is being accepted by the broad audience in the higher education institution?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Up front, I like to work with the project team to kind of figure out how are we going to define success on the back end. So we're not thinking about it, a month before go live. We're thinking about project success up front. And then as we're thinking about our change management specific tactics, I want to be able to hook them into those things. I'll give you an example. We were rolling out a human capital management system with multiple modules. And by module, we identified the 2 or 3 behaviors that we wanted to see the end user taking. And then we researched, can we see this information in the system? Can we monitor logins? Can we monitor errors? And how will we get that information? And then we were able to kind of report out on the back end. And so it's defining kind of upfront what you expect to see. What we did in that circumstance is we used a guided learning tool called Walk Me, and we created our change management tactic was we created a tour. So we were monitoring, our key metrics were, we were monitoring the completion of the tour. We were monitoring unique logins. We were monitoring repeated logins because we needed everybody to get into the system before benefits enrollment. We needed them to be comfortable. We needed to know that their passwords worked. We monitored those metrics while we worked with the help desk kind of every day, just monitoring what questions were coming in. And we were augmenting post go live the questions that were coming into the help desk. We were then turning into tips and tricks to communicate out to the user base. We've also used pulse checks. I like to use a readiness, willing, and ability pulse check at various points throughout a project, just to see are people, can they explain the value? Do they understand? Is the information actually getting to them? So I think there are a number of different tools that you can use and a number of different metrics. It really is dependent on what your project specific goals are. So that would be my best advice, is to think about that up front, tailored to the goals. And if you want to talk about that specifically, I'm happy to jump on the phone and just even brainstorm with you a little bit, because I know that can be a daunting task if you're trying to do it by yourself. I always feel like I need a second brain to talk through some of those things with.
Great. All right. Thank you again, Shannon, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Like Shannon said, if you have any questions or want to start a conversation about OCM, feel free to reach out to her at shannon.sims@avap.com. And like we said earlier, we will be sending out this recording to everyone who registered. And after we close out of today's webinar, there's a brief survey that will pop up on your screen, and we'd really appreciate if you took a moment to answer those questions, to let us know what you thought of the webinar and what other topics you'd like to hear more about in the future. So once again, thank you everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Have a good one.